Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much indeed for joining the weekly Greater Manchester briefing. Joined today by Baroness Bev Hughes, and Bev will take you through in a moment quite a significant publication we're making today, which is of the gender-based abuse strategy, the strategy to reduce violence against women and girls, which we've been working on for some time in Greater Manchester. And we'll come to that in a moment. But let's start with the latest position with regard to the numbers. So colleagues could put up the first slide. So this is a changed picture from the one you saw last week, but actually was one that we predicted, in that we thought that we may see some movement upwards in the figures with the commencement of school-based testing. Now, we don't want to say that that's the only reason. There may be more complex reasons behind the change, but it is clearly a factor, a very significant factor that needs to be taken into account. So you can see that the overall Greater Manchester rate has risen from 88.7 to 96.5, and we've seen increases in 7 out of our 10 districts. So that's obviously a changed picture, and one that we've got a close watch on with the return of schools, and just making sure that we are fully understanding everything that's going on. So a bumpy picture, I think it was described to us this morning at the Greater Manchester Emergency Committee, and we will be watching out for these bumps as we go further forward. So if we can turn to the next slide, please. This is important just because it appears to show that the increase in cases is in that 16 to 29 age range, and what you can see on the slide, particularly looking at the Tameside position, you can just see a darkening there in the 30 to 44, so very much in the working age population. So again, just beginning to watch this very carefully, and making sure that we understand the trends that are at play. But if I could take the next slide, please. We wanted you to see this one this week. We don't always show it, but it's obviously showing a significant change from last week to this, and that of course is the commencement of school-based lateral flow testing. So you can see that there in the figures, a doubling pretty much of the amount of testing that's been done across the 10 districts. So obviously a significant factor in terms of the the figures that we're presenting this week. If we could move on, please. So the position remains stable in care homes. I think it's fair to say higher than we would like, but no change, and I guess in that sense that is reassuring. Next slide, please. Now here we have a pretty much improved picture with regard to the situation in hospitals across Greater Manchester. All the numbers are heading downwards. If we look at the number of admissions, it's half what it was a fortnight ago. Also for inpatient diagnoses, significantly down on the fortnight, and reducing pressure in critical care and in general hospital beds. The health partnership would describe this as being a position that we last had around mid-October. So we now clearly have come down at the other side with regard to the pressure on our hospital system. So next slide, please. So we've got over the million mark this week, as we predicted we would, and that's obviously a huge achievement for everybody working on vaccination across Greater Manchester, including the volunteers supporting the programme as well, and of course all of the NHS staff involved. Very proud of you all, a great achievement, and obviously the programme continues to gather pace. There was one thing that I wanted to stress this week, and it's a message we're very keen to get out, and that is to remind people, the older cohort particularly, who were vaccinated first, that we are now very much getting into the second dose phase. So people will need to look up the appointment that they booked. They may well be getting a reminder by text or by phone from their GP or from the health service. So it's just to bring back to people's attention that the second dose period is very much upon us now, and we would encourage all residents who had their first dose back in January to be ready for the call up, or to remind yourself when your appointment was, and of course we want everybody to keep to those appointments. So that was a theme very much picked up at today's committee, and keen to stress that message to you today. So I think this is the final health slide. There is one missing there. We had a slide on self-isolation support. It will appear, I guess, at some point. There we go. That was that one. It was the yellow slide there. There we are. Thank you very much. So we just wanted to make you aware of a campaign being launched by the Growth Company, working with the Greater Manchester LEP and other business support organisations, which is about getting the message out to companies to support people to self-isolate in this phase as we look towards the wider unlocking and the further stages of the roadmap. There is some support there, but as you've heard me say many times, we don't believe it is as comprehensive as it needs to be. But nevertheless, we are calling on our Greater Manchester employers, all of them big and small, to support people who need to self-isolate. And it's timely because in recent days, the government has announced that the testing regime is now available to companies of all sizes. They can order lateral flow testing kits, and that was announced on the 6th of March. And I think companies have until the 31st of March to get their applications in. So of course we would encourage our businesses to take advantage of that, but in doing so we'd ask them to make a commitment to supporting people who do test positive, who then may need to self-isolate, supporting people from an income point of view, but also from a job protection point of view. So the testing regime is very much open to businesses whose employees can't work from home, and the Growth Company will be issuing a campaign press release today, working with other business support organisations to get the message out that there is support for employees out there, and you can see some of that listed on the screen. And we think this is a really important thing to stress again as we're going now to the period where we're beginning to prepare for the first significant unlocking. So that takes us through the health slides, and I'm going to introduce the Deputy Mayor to speak in a moment about the Greater Manchester gender-based abuse strategy, which we are publishing today because obviously since we last met a week ago, we've all witnessed the traumatic events of recent days, and the powerful outpouring and the powerful calls for change when it comes to women's and girls' safety. And given all of that, we felt it was right to say more today about the conversation that has been going on for some time in Greater Manchester about a new gender-based abuse strategy for the city region, particularly, of course, focusing on tackling violence against women and girls. This has been a piece of work that's been under discussion for some time. We were going to bring it out later in the year for public consultation, but it felt right to us, to the Deputy Mayor and I, to bring this forward now, to let people have early sight of the proposals and for the conversation to begin to capture the engagement that is there, and obviously to involve people in the emerging strategy. I think it's really important to say that this isn't proposing an easy or a quick fix, a single solution. If you read it, as you will be able to do later today, what you will see is a detailed, thoughtful, comprehensive plan that recognises that this is a long-term challenge, a 10-year challenge that will require culture change at every level, both individuals making changes and challenging their own behaviour at times, but also public organisations, businesses. This is a whole society change that we need to see, but we are very much saying that we want to see that change in Greater Manchester. Of course, it starts with policing and some of the issues uncovered by the HMIC report last year. And Bev will say a little more about that in a moment. But we've been both very clear that we want to see the culture change around violence against women and girls right throughout Greater Manchester society, but absolutely in terms of the way the police deal with victims, and I think victim culture at the heart of Greater Manchester Police, and that whole approach to positive, accountable, victim-centred policing that we've spoken about. Now, just to say something about how we want to see that move forward, of course it is linked to new permanent leadership within Greater Manchester Police, and just to say a word on the recruitment process for the Chief Constable, we're making very good progress. We're getting closer to be able to appoint a new Chief Constable for Greater Manchester Police. We're pleased to be able to say today that we have a strong field of candidates from which to choose, and it will be the clear message from both of us when the new Chief Constable is permanently in place to say that this is a big priority for us to change the way we support women and girls who are the victims of abuse and violence in Greater Manchester from the very, very first time that they contact Greater Manchester Police. And with that, I am now going to hand over to the Deputy Mayor to take you through more of the content of the gender-based abuse strategy. So over to you, Bev.
Thank you very much, Andy, and good afternoon, everybody. As the Mayor said, I've been working on this with my team for some considerable time, and I do want to thank all the individuals and organisations that have actually worked with us already and helped and contributed to what's in the document at the moment. People with expertise in this field, and that includes survivors and women's groups as well. I particularly want to thank Professor David Gadd, Dr. Caroline Miles and Dr. Nicole Brennan from the University of Manchester, who over the last 6 to 9 months have worked very, very closely with me and my team and made sure that we are really up to date with the latest thinking, the latest research and the evidence, not just from the UK, but actually from cities around the world, and they've made a great contribution to this document. As the Mayor said, we had planned to publish this after the election because of Purdah and so on, but because of the context that we're in now, it seems right to go forward initially at this stage with a kind of informal process. So the document we have is going to be published on the website. We're going to be inviting the public and organisations to write to us, to comment, to suggest things if they think we've got things missed out. And at the end of that period, just before the election, we'll collate all of that, those responses. We'll produce a revised document, and then after the election, we'll orchestrate the kind of more formal consultation process that we would normally have, which will involve focus groups and other means by which we can garner people's views on that iteration of the document at that time. So, just to introduce what's in here, I think it's important to say at the outset that the ambition of this gender-based abuse strategy is that over the next 10 years at most, we'll see a radical transformation in Greater Manchester in our approach to gender-based abuse, and that as a result, women and girls will experience a step change in the incidence of abuse and violence in all its forms that they currently experience. And just let's remind ourselves what that abuse includes. It ranges from street and workplace harassment, bullying, threatening and stalking, both on and offline, domestic abuse and coercive control, physical and sexual assaults and rapes by strangers, acquaintances, family members, femicide, the killing of women by men, sexual exploitation, grooming, romance fraud, violence by family members, including so-called honour-based abuse, female genital mutilation, adolescent to parent abuse, and elder abuse. And the incidence of all of those forms of abuse is very, very extensive indeed. I think 36% of all the reports of violence to Greater Manchester Police, for example, are domestic violence, and reports of domestic violence are now approaching 45 to 50,000 reports every year. So it's very, very substantial, the incidence of violence and abuse against women and girls. And the strategy starts from the position that the common thread which runs through all of those different manifestations of violence against women and girls is the power differential, basically, which still exists in general between women and men. And the fact that as a result, some men, too many men, feel entitled to do or say whatever they wish to women, to disrespect women, and to harm them one way or another with impunity. And you know, we frequently hear this sense of entitlement, don't we, amplified by powerful men in business, in politics, or as celebrities who boast in the media and on sometimes on the world stage about their ability to abuse women. So fundamentally, this is also a global issue. Fundamentally, then, it's about changing those attitudes and that sense of entitlement. And that is why, learning from other cities who are further ahead with this than we are at the moment, learning from those cities across the world, we know that this cannot be a quick fix. That is why it has to be a sustained strategy, a 10-year strategy, why we want, as the document says, to change the story on violence against women and girls. And so this is the first premise of the strategy. That first and foremost, we've got to seek to change those attitudes right across society, because it's not enough just to improve services and mop up, if you like, the harm of violence and abuse. We have to try and get upstream and prevent it from happening in the first place. Our second premise is that whilst policing and criminal justice, as the Mayor has said, is centrally important to improving the protection and support to women and girls, of itself, that is not enough. So the strategy encompasses a whole system approach, including education, businesses and workplaces, health, support for victims and survivors, crucially, housing issues, the needs of children and young people who are often caught in the crossfire of family violence, the role of voluntary organisations, as well as tackling perpetrators effectively where we can. As a matter of principle, the strategy puts women and girls front and centre. Women and girls, including those who have experienced violence and abuse, will be central to decision making as we go forward and deciding how we improve services. One of the most important commitments is that we'll establish a new gender-based abuse board that will oversee the implementation of the strategy, draw up detailed annual delivery plans, and the board will include victims and survivors as co-chairs, as leaders and as members. I will chair that board jointly with a survivor of gender-based abuse, appointed annually, to reflect as well the diversity of the communities from which women and girls in Greater Manchester come. Some priority tools for the new board will be to initiate a wide-ranging public engagement campaign, and secondly, to start the radical improvements we need to see in policing and in criminal justice. And that's why, in the light of the recent HMIC FRS report on the services provided to victims by GMP, a first priority of the board will be to review how domestic abuse cases are handled by Greater Manchester Police. Much of the work that's going on now to implement the improvement plan following that HMIC report will benefit the victims of gender-based abuse. there is a Think Victim campaign developed by the Acting Chief Constable, and that's being embedded right across GMP, with every officer undergoing training in that. Improving, crucially, the case management by frontline officers. Analysing the footage, this is going on now, the footage of body-worn video cameras that's already happened, to look at the interaction between officers and victims when the officer first attends. And we're learning a lot from that about how officers can be trained to do that much, much better. The strategy itself includes a raft of commitments, far too numerous and wide-ranging for me to go into a lot of detail here, but just to highlight one or two, if I may. Firstly, making misogyny a recordable hate crime is a key priority for me. Some police services are trialling this now, and if the government do not change the law to that effect, we in Greater Manchester will explore how far we can implement that change. I think it's vital to challenging attitudes and to preventing gender-based abuse that we see misogyny for the hate crime that it is. Secondly, changing women's experiences of the wider criminal justice system, the Crown Prosecution Service and the courts too, where women often report feeling re-traumatised by that system itself. We need to look at housing, thirdly, with housing providers, so that in cases of domestic violence, for instance, it's not the woman and the children who have to leave the home, but the perpetrator. And we seek ways of perpetrators being rehoused away from their family. Fourthly, reclaiming the streets, very much supporting that, and reclaiming other public places too. For example, training our PCSOs and others who walk around our streets to be alert and to recognise the potential risks to women. Introducing a discreet emergency contact system for passengers on public transport, for instance. Helping local authorities use public space protection orders more effectively and targeted at this issue of violence against women and girls. Crucially, increasing the capacity and quality of our victim and advocacy services. Increasing the number of independent advocates which we've got in that system to support women who've been abused. And of course, increasing training and awareness throughout all our services, including health services, education, primary care, and the places where women work. And last but not least, developing the therapeutic, mental health and trauma-based services, not only for victims and survivors, but also for the children affected by the violence that they get caught up in. So this is a long-term, complex, multi-agency strategy. And crucially, it needs committed and strong leadership, not just from the Mayor and myself, but from all our organisations across the public, private, voluntary and civic sectors. A lot of those leaders are men. And this is my final point, because although the strategy is predominantly about changing the behaviour and the attitudes of some men, we definitely need men to help us do that. Men in all positions, whether leaders or not, to stand by women and take a stand against violence against women and girls and help us to achieve the ambition of this strategy. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you very much indeed, Bev, and thanks for all the work that you and others have done on the strategy. And I'll pick up, I guess, where you left off and accept my own responsibility to lead the change that we need to see in the way sometimes men behave, how behaviour can make women feel. You are absolutely right to say that people who can do most to change women's safety and sense of safety across Greater Manchester are men and boys, and I'm certainly committing to lead a high-profile campaign to ensure that we inform men and boys how behaviour can make women feel, and how we build a more considerate approach to that from the earliest stages. So certainly we'll bring that forward in due course. I think the proposals in the strategy on transport, increasing safety on public transport, is something that I will want to build into our reform of the public transport system, which is coming forward soon. You mentioned, Bev, working with local authorities to create public space protection orders that focus on street harassment. And we will want to work with our nighttime economy advisor on that, and particularly work with bars and venues that also want to create a new culture on the nighttime economy. So lots in the strategy. We would encourage all colleagues to read it carefully. If I could just finally say, we're conscious that events of recent days will have given rise to issues that members of the Greater Manchester public may want to raise. So we've got one final slide just to share with you, which is around how people can contact victim support. It's that slide, thank you. So what you have there is the phone numbers for the Greater Manchester Victims Services line, and obviously the email address as well. So thank you very much indeed, Bev. I will now hand over to Ross to take us through your questions today. Ross.
Thanks very much, Andy. I'm going to go to a question from Nigel Barlow to you in the first instance. How concerned are you about actually to Bev first, sorry. How concerned are you about the increase in gun violence which has seemingly accompanied the pandemic? What do you feel are the causes, and are we returning to the 1990s and early 2000s across the region, Bev?
Thank you very much, Nigel, for that. Yeah, there is, you're right, a very considerable incidence of firearms discharges, particularly. That's what the public are aware of, and that's what we hear about. And this is largely fueled, Nigel, by the relatively high number of organised crime groups in Greater Manchester who trade in firearms and who trade in drugs as well, and the violence that goes alongside that. GMP, actually, this is an area of strength for them. They do have a very, very high standard of operational expertise and capacity, and if you've watched the press releases over the last few weeks alone, you will read about a number of incidents in which firearms have been retrieved, in which large hauls of drugs have been retrieved, and that is because of the intelligence-led approach and the special operations that are going on all the time, not visible until there's an actual positive result very often, but nonetheless it's a very, very significant and important element of policing in Greater Manchester. I don't think we're returning to the causes that we saw some decades ago. This is about international drug and firearm crime and organised crime, and we see the kind of manifestation of that in the discharges around our communities, and it's very threatening, and that's why it is such a very high priority for Greater Manchester Police.
Thanks, Dave.
Say again, Ross, sorry.
Apologies, some feedback there. Andy, did you have anything to add?
Only just very briefly, Nigel, to say that I think year on year, I don't think we've seen a major change yet, although, as Bev says, there have been recent events that have caused concern, and we're watching very, very carefully. So I think your question is prompted by some of those recent events, and obviously I don't think we can say we're back where we were in the 90s, but obviously Bev and I are not complacent at all about this, and want to ensure that we take the toughest line possible against any form of gun crime in Greater Manchester.
Thanks, Andy. I'm going to go to two questions on the Home Secretary's announcement yesterday around PCCs. Jessica Hill's the first one from the Local Government Chronicle. Andy, do you support the government's decision to switch combined authority mayoral elections to first past the post? Do you have any cynicism towards the reasons for doing so? And she also wanted to ask if you're supportive of the government's proposals to give elected mayors fire and rescue powers where it's possible. She's asked, would you then take on those powers in Greater Manchester. And Matthew
Shall I deal with that one first, Ross? Because it's obviously...
Sure. Yeah, the Matthew Holehouse one is very similar, but yeah, if you want to take that one on.
Oh yeah, I'll miss stuff if I don't. So thanks, Jessica. No is the answer to your question. I don't see a case for change because I actually have got growing concerns about the first past the post system for Westminster elections, but you can see it as being more justified when people are choosing a government and they're basically choosing between 2 or 3 parties. I think the first past the post system is intended to give an emphatic result that allows people to form a government. When it comes to a mayoral election, I don't see a case actually from changing from the current system. And it does overly favour the bigger parties. If you look at the current Greater Manchester mayoral election, we're looking at, I would think, at least 8, maybe 9 candidates, and that's got to be a good thing. And you know, I would say that the system that we have allows people to come forward and in some ways empowers the public with their vote in being able to obviously indicate preferences. So the honest answer is no, I don't see the case for doing this now. It feels like a backward step to me, and I think it's hard not to conclude that this is kind of a step back to a system that benefits the 2 main parties at a time when we're seeing, you know, a greater number of people standing at elections. It doesn't feel like the right step to be taking. In terms of the being supportive of proposals on fire and rescue, well, on that I am supportive, because obviously we do have those powers within the Greater Manchester system, and the Deputy Mayor and I have used those powers in many ways to bring about a change in Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service over recent years. In a similar way that we're now embarking on a process of change within Greater Manchester Police. We early in our time in office, following the Kerslake report, the response to the Manchester Arena attack, we embarked upon a visit to all fire stations in Greater Manchester, conversations with people at every level of the organisation. We now have a new Chief Fire Officer in post who we believe is really showing the right leadership for Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service going forward and getting to the heart of some of the issues that were holding our fire service back. So I do support that proposal, and we believe it can lead to more integrated public services, not just here in Greater Manchester, but anywhere that would take up those powers.
Thanks, Andy. Bev, did you want to come in at all on the fire and rescue service powers?
No, that's fine. Nothing to add. Thank you.
Thanks, Bev. Andy, the question from The Economist was very similarly, what's your reaction to the Home Secretary's announcement that the electoral system for CA mayors will be changed by law? Were you aware of the proposal, and do you feel the current electoral system has the support of people in GM? So very similar topic, but slightly different.
Yeah, just to say a little more, Matthew, I was aware that the government had proposed it in a manifesto for the general election, but not that they were going to bring it forward at this point in time. As I say, it feels like a backward step to me, and I think the mayoral election process should be less about the main parties and more about the individuals that are standing, giving people the choice of candidates, allowing them to indicate a preference. I just think that lends itself more to the mayoral system, and I certainly didn't hear any complaints about that system at the 2017 mayoral election. And you know, I would ask the government maybe to kind of see what people think about the current mayoral election system before they firm up on making this change.
Thanks, Andy. A question from Hannah Boland at The Telegraph for you. Research released last week suggested that academics from universities in the north of England were still struggling to raise as much cash for their companies as those in cities including Oxford and Cambridge, with just 7 deals agreed for the University of Manchester spin-out companies last year compared to 62 for Cambridge and 58 for Oxford. How important is it that there's funding available to turn groundbreaking research from northern universities, including Manchester, into innovative startups? Do you think incentives are needed to make sure that venture capitalists are looking beyond the golden triangle of Oxford, Cambridge and London? And do you think this will be key if we're to level up across the UK?
I very much do, Hannah. I think you're asking a really important question. We have recently met as a Greater Manchester system with the UKRI, obviously the body that oversees research and development investment. I think there is a recognition from UKRI that they need a more place-based approach to their work. The lion's share of funding is still trapped within the Golden Triangle, and that's not to be critical of the Golden Triangle. It is a world-class resource for the UK, and you know, the university, we're benefiting right now, aren't we, from the quality of research that goes on within our leading universities, and obviously the Oxford vaccine is something that is benefiting the whole world at the moment. But there is clearly a case for breaking beyond that and supporting the growing innovation ecosystem that we have here in Greater Manchester. And the University of Manchester in particular has shown real skill at bringing new innovations out of the university into spin-off companies. We only have to think about the Graphene Engineering Innovation Centre, which is a prime example of exactly what you're talking about. So it's our view that there is so much more that can be done here. We have established a body called Innovation GM, which is absolutely about capitalising on these opportunities. We do have our ambition of being the UK's leading digital city region, UK's leading green city region, and there is plenty of crossover between those two things. We are Europe's fastest growing digital and tech hub, which is a great thing for me to be able to say as the Mayor of Greater Manchester. So people are backing us, people are investing in us, and if we get more of that research and development spending coming here, then I think we will only grow the innovation ecosystem that already exists within Greater Manchester. So yeah, we feel strongly, and I know this is a view shared by the other mayors in the other big city regions, because we've discussed this. It's time for research and development investments in the UK to be spread more around, linked to the levelling up agenda, but particularly going to the places that already now have a growing success story when it comes to innovation. And we certainly believe here in Greater Manchester we are one of those, and we're at the forefront of that.
Thanks, Andy. Question from Andrew Knoll at the Wigan Post and Wigan Observer to you. How concerned are you about the rising COVID case numbers in Wigan and other GM districts? Is there anything that currently needs to be done to bring those figures down?
So we are concerned, Andrew, but as I was saying, it's not to overreact, because obviously this is the first rise after a sustained period of reduction, and we do believe that the testing regime in schools might partly explain the change that we've seen in the last few days. So it's for the moment a question of keeping a watching brief on what happens. We're moving to a different testing regime for schools next week, when it's going to be more home-based testing rather than school-based testing, and again we'll have to see what that does to the number of tests taken and to the figures. So it's a case of watch it carefully at the moment, alongside the what are called variants of concern, the new strains that we are also seeing around the country and also within Greater Manchester. So we have to look at all of that together. It's why I stressed again today the question of self-isolation support and welcoming the campaign being launched by our growth company. That remains a chink in the armour that COVID might be able to exploit. And it's very important, if we're doing more testing in schools, as we are, more testing in businesses, as we will soon be doing, we've got to be able to take the right action when we identify those cases as a result of the testing. It doesn't make sense to increase all of this testing, but not also increase support for self-isolation support. Obviously, schools are doing a good job on that in terms of reacting quickly, but we need the same approach within businesses. And we still believe the government hasn't done enough on the question of self-isolation support, so we will continue to make that case. There is a final point to be made, which is where we are seeing higher levels of cases in certain areas, as we have seen in Greater Manchester throughout. Of course, when we look to the roadmap and the unlocking, that can present greater risks here than to other parts of the country. And we continue to want to make the case to the government that ensuring that there are kind of the constant flow of vaccine supplies here to enable us to get down the age ranges as quickly as possible, that too creates an extra safety in the areas where the case rates are highest. So I think the answer really is not to overreact at this point. Obviously notice the change, although it was predicted to some extent, but see how things develop in the next few weeks, and reiterate the message to the public that, you know, while it may feel like we're beginning to emerge from all of the challenge, it's let's not go too soon. You know, there is still a need for discipline here as we come through this period.
Thanks, Andy. We'll go to questions from Kevin Fitzpatrick at Radio Manchester. The first one is addressed to you, but maybe one going to Bev first. What do you have to say about our story that GMP has uncovered a further 4,500 crimes that haven't been properly recorded or investigated since December? How can the public have confidence in calling the force? And the second one for you, on bus reforms, are you surprised that Stagecoach is taking legal action, or was this expected?
So I answer the first, Ross, and then let Bev say something, then I'll come back to the bus question, if that's okay. So just to say on the first, the reason the public can have confidence, Kevin, is because this is the result of the forensic process that Bev and I, working with the interim chief constable, put in place following the HMIC report, because the work is being done at every level now in a very detailed way, with huge amounts of auditing of processes going on. This is what's being brought to light, and obviously we're going the extra mile as we must to ensure that all cases are being properly handled. But this is the result of that. So, you know, I think this is evidence that the efforts that we have made to hold the force to account are bearing the right result, and we are getting to the heart of the issues that the HMIC report uncovered. So this is the solution beginning to emerge. So very much, I would say that the public can have confidence the issue that was identified by HMIC is being addressed. I wouldn't today claim that we are yet where we want to be. There is a lot further to go, but this is evidence that progress is being made, rather than that there's you know, a further issue that we didn't know about. This is the result of the challenges and the procedures that we put in place. But I'll hand over to Bev, who may want to add to that, and then I'll come back to your bus question, Kevin.
I think, Andy, you've answered it with the main reason. It's precisely because of the work being done, the implementation, as you say, forensically and robustly of the improvement plan, which is changing the way GMP records crime, which is rigorously training all of the officers in how they should be doing that better. A massive audit exercise to double check that those decisions on recording are being taken properly. So that is what we're seeing here with that extra 4,500. These are some of the cases that HMIC said should have been recording, but which now, because of improved processes and improved training, are being recorded. The second reason I think the public can continue to have confidence is because not all was poor performance in GMP. And I'm glad this slide is still up on the screen, because I meant to refer to it when I was speaking earlier. HMIC found pockets of very, very good practice in this territory. They praised GMP, for example, on sustaining significant improvements in the way it polices rape and serious sexual assault. And those two quotations there, taken directly from the HMIC report, testify to that. There is some very, very good practice in which the public can have confidence in GMP, and in those areas where it was found wanting, it is rapidly improving.
Go back to Andy on the bus element of the question.
So, Kevin, thank you for the question. a limit to what I can say, because obviously we're in a process. The only thing I would want to say is that this is a democratic process, using powers given to Greater Manchester by Parliament and to other mayoral combined authorities to be able to take decisions on the way buses are run in any city region. So this is an act of Parliament that gave areas powers to make changes. And of course, we've seen this week the National Bus Strategy being published, which has encouraged areas to go more quickly on reform and make a clear decision about the future of bus services. And the strategy, as I understand it, very much uses the language that we have used in Greater Manchester of wanting to see more London-style services in other parts of the country. So it is for bus operators to justify their decisions. All I can say is, this is a democratic process that is unfolding, and I'm not certain how it can be justified for that process to be disrupted, particularly when there's an act of Parliament underpinning it, and also a government strategy that is encouraging more urgent action.
Thanks, Andy. I'm going to go to a couple of questions from Jen Williams at the MEN for yourself and Bev. On the gender-based violence strategy, HMI was clear in December that GMP had been failing victims of domestic violence, stalking, coercive control and harassment crimes that disproportionately affect women. Given that you were also mayor when GMP was warned earlier in 2020 that the new computer system was potentially missing thousands of cases of domestic abuse, and also 2 years before that when it was previously warned to record domestic abuse incidents properly, why should women have any faith in the strategy you've outlined today? And a question relating to last night's scrutiny meeting at Stockport Council. You mentioned IOPS was one of the reasons you asked the Chief Constable to quit in December. You still agree with the comments you made a year ago after the HMI raised concerns about the system and its impacts on safeguarding that IOPS is not a scandal, given you ended up showing the Chief the door because of it? And do you think you did enough to listen to police whistleblowers in 2019? Andy, I'll put that to you first if you want to bring Bev in.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Jen. So there's a lot there, and I want to make sure that I cover it properly. Well, I just, if I may, go back to the slide that that Bev referred to, because I think it's just worth just showing that again. I mean, the HMIC report at times has been reported as though it was a kind of uniformly negative picture, and it wasn't. It's obviously a challenging, difficult picture for Greater Manchester Police, no doubt about it. And you correctly, Jen, quote the HMIC with regard to domestic abuse, harassment, stalking, coercive control, and that very much is laid out there. But to look at the top quote, of course, it says that reporting of rape had improved markedly. The force had sustained good reporting standards for other sexual offences. So, that is the picture. And on that second point, Bev and I have just touched on the fact that we are now holding the force to account to improve on those very issues, and there is the first sign of that improvement, with changes coming through with regard to the crimes being recorded by GMP. So that, I guess, is the way I would answer. That's why people can have faith, because we are acting on what has been said. The force was not not bad across the board, as HMIC revealed, but urgent action was needed to make improvements, and improvements are beginning to come through. So to go on to the IOPS system, well, again, we held the force to account on that because, as you may recall, HMIC were commissioned to look at IOPS and the implementation of IOPS, precisely to pick up the kind of issues that you are mentioning. That's why we agreed to HMIC being brought in to do that further report. So, as we've always said, we don't run Greater Manchester Police. What we have to do is hold them to account on behalf of the Greater Manchester public. And I think the Deputy Mayor and I can show on IOPS, on the HMIC, or on child sexual exploitation, we have commissioned work to hold them to account, to improve what they do. And what I can say this afternoon is that the Greater Manchester Police Deputy Chief Constable Mabs Hussain will be making a much fuller statement tomorrow on the new force-wide unit on child sexual exploitation, which very much also links to this issue, and something upon which that women and girls have very strong feelings across Greater Manchester, and rightly need to have assurance that improvements are being made. I am absolutely confident that I can say to you today, as a result of the report that I commissioned days after coming into office, Greater Manchester Police has made radical changes to the way it approaches child sexual exploitation, not just going back and looking at historic cases and making arrests in respect of those cases, but also hugely improving what it does across the board, dealing with current cases as well. And then to get to your final point about last night's scrutiny meeting, it is true that I had concerns, outstanding concerns about about IOPS, and when we had raised concerns about IOPS, the information that we received back. We have both said on record that we don't believe we got a full picture from the former Chief Constable with regard to the implementation of IOPS. I would stand by what I said. I don't think it is a scandal implies that it's, you know, people have ignored the issues completely, and that there was some kind of serious cover-up. I don't believe that is what has happened here, but what we didn't see was all of the transparency we needed, or indeed all of the action that we needed to address the issues that were being brought forward by frontline officers. And again, that was why we commissioned the HMIC report, to make sure that those issues were completely understood and were being dealt with. So it wasn't the case that it was the IOPS situation alone which led to me making the change in leadership. It was the concerns we had about IOPS and how that had been handled, combined with the concerns raised by HMIC last year, that made me conclude that this was the time for new leadership in Greater Manchester Police. I'm pleased to say today that we're getting close to the point where we can put in place permanent new leadership. We have a good, strong field of candidates, and we are all getting to the point now where we can look forward to making that culture change within Greater Manchester Police that we all want to see. So a long question, Jen, but I hope I've answered it, and I don't know whether Bev would like to add anything else.
I just make this point, Jen, actually, which I think probably is self-evident. But, you know, when you're in the position that the Mayor and I are in, vis-a-vis the senior leadership of the police service, then the first port of call for advice about how things are going is clearly the Chief Constable and the senior leadership team. If you get concerns that you're not getting the full information, or if you're still getting concerns expressed by other people that all is not as it should be, then our only recourse is to try and get some independent advice, some advice from a quarter that's independent of the Chief Constable and the senior team. In both of those instances, in relation to IOPS and obviously in relation to the HMIC report on victim services, that is what we had, and that is what enabled us to act. You know, you can't just act on a whim. We are not IT experts. We are not policing experts ourselves. So we have to get, if we don't feel we can take as read the advice we're getting from the person who should be giving it, we have to seek independent advice. In those instances where that was needed, that is exactly what we did.
Thanks, Bev.
Ross, can I just say one final thing, just in response to Jen's question, because there was a lot in there. I just want to say this is, in some ways, it's like the HMIC report as well, Jen. I just want to make this point that IOPS can be portrayed as though it's universally bad and none of it is working. And that also isn't the case. It's not the case. There's large parts of the system now that are working and are a significant improvement on what we had before. The issue is the police works element of IOPS, and that is very much now where our focus is. So, we haven't ignored police whistleblowers. We have been talking to them. We've had recent meetings with the Greater Manchester Police Federation, Bev and I, and so we're really boiling it down to what is the precise issues now that we need to isolate and deal with. So it's not the case that IOPS is a when I say IOPS is not a scandal, as I say, that it isn't, because large parts of it have improved things. What we've got is an element of it that still isn't working as it should, and we are very focused on that now, and we're bringing in outside help to make the necessary improvements. So that's where we are.
Thanks. I'm going to go to Hannah Miller, and then I'll come back to Maya Wolf Robinson's question in a second, just because we're on Jen's question, and this is a follow-up. Given the failings of GMP on these crimes, do you wish you'd spoken out sooner about changing the culture within the force? Andy, do you want to take that one first?
No, I think we've handled it in a measured way, as Bev said. We've got to balance a lot of things in performing the role of Police and Crime Commission and holding the force to account. We are, on the one hand, there to support the force, to ensure that we maintain public confidence in policing, while often challenging things internally, as we did on a daily basis and still do on a daily basis. And it's not the case that all of that should be done in public. It's right that we challenge in public and in private, but that is what we had done. As I said earlier in the briefing, Hannah, I very much challenged the culture with regard to child sexual exploitation within days of taking office, and instituted a major piece of work on that, which is leading to major change, and you will hear more about that tomorrow. So we have to work carefully. We have to be clear that where we think there is something that needs to be challenged, that then we put in place the right challenge on that issue, as we did with child sexual exploitation, or indeed as we did with IOPS, when concerns were raised in 2019, as Jen correctly identified. Then we agreed to HMIC coming in to look at that and give us an independent assessment of the implementation of IOPS and then the issues that we needed to address. So where we've needed to, we have brought in the outside support that we needed to bring in. It isn't the case that we should provide a constant public running commentary on all of those things. But when it came to the point where, with the HMIC report, that I didn't believe that we were getting the necessary change that we needed to see, that at that point it was right to point to what we both felt was a cultural problem internally, where the information wasn't being given to us in a full and comprehensive manner, and consequently that was holding back both our ability to hold the force to account, but also the force's ability to move forward itself. So we believe we've handled things in a measured, in a balanced way, holding the force to account all the way through the last 4 years. But where we needed to say it as it was, so the public were clear about what was being done, we did so.
Bev, did you have anything to add to that? Okay, we'll move on to Maya Wolf Robinson at The Guardian. Just two more questions and then we'll wrap up. Question for you in the first instance, Bev. How should upcoming protests against the policing bill or violence against women and girls be policed?
Thank you, Maya. Well, I mean, just first let me say, although, with some circumspection, because I actually wasn't there in London, but on the face of it, in terms of what we saw, that was really, really regrettable, and I was very, very shocked to see the way that was handled, and I would not want anything like that to happen in Greater Manchester. Our police service actually do have a lot of experience in handling protests. Complication at the moment, of course, is that the government has made them illegal technically under the coronavirus restrictions. But I think basically, and we heard Ian Pilling, the acting chief constable, talk about this earlier today at the emergency COVID committee. They have a lot of experience in negotiating with people who want to protest, and in general, normal times, in facilitating that, in coming to agreements with the organisers as to how the event will run. We had 300, I think, people yesterday out on a protest against the bill. That was handled calmly. Everybody on both sides behaved well, and I think that is the approach that we should take. We should start with discussion and agreement, and try and make sure that in the event itself there is no escalation whatsoever. That needs both sides actually to cooperate, and that's what I would want to see. As I say, I think the legal context does make it technically difficult for the police, but we're all agreed we wouldn't want to see any repetition of what happened in London here. So we'll be approaching it in that way.
Thanks, Andy. Did you get anything to add to that one? We'll move on to the final question, and Andy, I'll put this one to you first. It's from Lucy Tomlinson at Manchester Confidential. Given that there have been pockets of vaccine hesitancy in GM, what can you say to reassure people worried about the AstraZeneca vaccine and blood clotting? Presumably you will soon be getting the call for the vaccine yourself, so we'll use this as an opportunity to encourage people to get a vaccine a la Keir Starmer at the Crick.
So thank you, Lucy. What can I say to reassure people? What I can say as a former health secretary is that there are really strong processes in place to ensure that any adverse reactions to the vaccine or more serious incidents that may be linked to the vaccine are flagged immediately. They are looked into carefully. That is it's called a yellow card reporting system that also links to other reports from around Europe. We have one of the best regulators in the world in the MHRA, and they have not said there is a safety concern about the vaccine, and that's been echoed by the European Medicines Agency. So that is what I would say. You know, this has got to be a safety-led, evidence-led debate. The concern I would have is there's some sort of politics lurking around the edges of this debate. That's got to be completely pushed to one side. It's the evidence alone that matters here, and currently both the British and European regulators are not raising any safety concerns, and that's the issue that the public need to focus on. In terms of the call up, I think it might be my turn now. It's coming soon. I did say to the staff at the mass vaccination centre when I visited that I would be going back there to check up on how things are going when my turn came around. So I will be going back there quite soon, and I'll be quite clear that I'm going, and if anybody wants to photograph it, they're most entitled to do so. So yeah, it's really fantastic to see the progress on vaccination. You know, again, thank you to all of the staff that have been involved and all of the volunteers, and I think that absolutely gives us a lot of encouragement, given the supplies we've got coming. The report to our committee today was that there are good supplies on the way to Greater Manchester for the rest of this month and into April. We think we can make some real progress now in the weeks that lie ahead. We need to get the message out about second doses and people going back for those doses. We also want people in priority 6 group, people who are clinically vulnerable, to take up the opportunity of getting a vaccine. We want to improve take-up rate there, but overall it's fantastic progress that's been made. Great to get through the 1 million mark, and yes, you will see me at the mass vaccination centre soon.
Thanks, Andy. Bev, did you have any comments on that one? Andy, that's us out of questions. So if you've got any final thoughts.
I don't have any great deal. Bev, is there anything you wanted to say in closing on the strategy in terms of how people might engage in the conversation?
I think this, just to say this, this is a period when the strategy will be out there. We're really interested in everybody's views about it and any suggestions as to how we could strengthen it so that we can get it into the best possible position before we again publish a revised version and go into that formal consultation process. So it's an extra opportunity for us to garner the views of our citizens and other interested parties and organisations around, and let's hear your views.
Thanks, Bev. And I would just want to echo that and to say in closing, the reason we put this out there today is we want to be open and inclusive in terms of the way we take this conversation forward. We recognise the huge strength of feeling. We both feel it ourselves. We want to challenge ourselves, challenge the Greater Manchester system. This is a 10-year change that we want to bring through, as we said, and we also feel now is the time to start looking forward into a new era in Greater Manchester Police, and we will have more to say about that shortly. So thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. Thank you to Ross for taking us through your questions, and we will see you all again next week. Thanks very much.
Thank you.